Yes, what? Saphira asked. We should not be sitting and talking when there is sport to be had. My father, Aragon exclaimed. It's not Morzin, it's Brom. Roran blinked. Brom. Yes, Brom. Even Arya appeared surprised. Are you sure, Aragon? How do you know? Of course I'm sure. I'll explain later, but I couldn't wait to tell you the truth. Roran shook his head. Brom. I never would have guessed, but I suppose it makes sense. You must be glad to be rid of Morzen's name. More than glad, Aragon said, grinning. Roran clapped him on the back, then said, watch yourself, EH. And trotted after Horst and the other villagers. Arya moved away in the same direction, but before she went more than a few steps, Aragon called her name and said, the cripple who is whole has left to Weldenvarden and joined Icelandsati at Gilead. Arya's green eyes widened and her lips parted, as if she were about to ask a question. Before she could, the column of inrushing warriors swept her deeper into the city. Blodgarm sidled closer to Aragon. Shadeslayer, why did the morning sage leave the forest? He and his companion felt that the time had come to strike against the Empire and to reveal their presence to Galbatorix. The elf's fur rippled. That is indeed momentous news. Aragon climbed back onto Saphira. To Blodgarm and his other guards, he said, work your way up to the keep. We'll meet you there. Without waiting for the elf to answer, Saphira jumped onto the stairs leading to the top of the city walls. The stone steps cracked under her weight as she climbed up to the wide parapet, from which she took flight over the burning hovels outside Finster, flapping quickly to gain altitude. Arya will have to give us permission before we can tell anyone else about Oromis and Glader, said Aragon, remembering the oath of secrecy he, Oric, and Saphira had sworn to Queen Icelandsati during their first visit to Elsmera. I am sure she will once she hears our account, said Saphira. Aye. Aragon and Saphira flew from place to place within Finster, landing wherever they spotted a large clump of men or wherever members of the Varden appeared beleaguered. Unless someone immediately attacked, Aragon attempted to convince each group of enemies to surrender. He failed as often as he succeeded, but he felt better for having tried, for many of the men who thronged the streets were ordinary citizens of Finster, and not trained soldiers. To each, Aragon said, the Empire is our foe, not you. Do not take up arms against us and you shall have no cause to fear us. The few times Aragon saw a woman or child running through the dark city, he ordered them to hide in the nearest house, and without exception, they obeyed. Aragon examined the minds of every person around him and Saphira, searching for magicians who might mean them harm, but he found no other spellcaster besides the three they had already seen, and the three were careful to keep their thoughts hidden from him. It concerned him that they did not seem to have rejoined the fight in any noticeable way. Maybe they intend to abandon the city, he said to Saphira. Would Galbatorix let them leave in the middle of a battle? I doubt he wants to lose any of his spellcasters. Maybe, but we should still tread with care. Who knows what they are planning? Aragon shrugged. For now, the best thing we can do is help the Varden secure Finster as quickly as possible. She agreed and angled toward a skirmish in a nearby square. Fighting in a city was different from fighting in the open, as Aragon and Saphira were accustomed to. The narrow streets and close-set buildings hampered Saphira's movements and made it difficult to react when soldiers attacked, even though Aragon could sense the men approaching long before they arrived. Their encounters with the soldiers devolved into dark and desperate struggles, broken only by the occasional burst of fire or magic. More than once, Saphira wrecked the front of a house with a careless sweep of her tail. She and Aragon always managed to escape permanent injury, through a combination of luck, skill, and Aragon's wards, but the attacks made them even more cautious and tense than they normally were in battle. The fifth such confrontation left Aragon so enraged that when the soldiers began to withdraw, as they always did in the end, he gave chase, determined to kill every last one. They surprised him by swerving off the street and crashing through the barred door of a millinery shop. Aragon followed, peeking over the cracked wreckage of the door. The inside of the shop was pitch black and smelled like chicken feathers and stale perfume. He could have lit the shop with magic, but since he knew the soldiers were at a greater disadvantage than he was, he refrained. Aragon felt their minds nearby, and he could hear their ragged breathing, but he was uncertain of what lay between him and
Let's
them.
begin the
He
transmutation.
inched deeper into the inky shop, feeling his way with his feet. He felt his shield in front of him and rising her over his head, ready to strike. Faint as a line of thread falling to the floor, Aragon heard an object flying through the air. He jerked backward and staggered as a mace or a hammer struck his shield, breaking it Shouts erupted. A man knocked over a chair or a table and something shattered against a wall. Aragon lashed out and felt Reisinger sink into flesh and bury itself in bone. A weight dragged on the end of his spear. Aragon yanked it free, and the man who had struck collapsed across his head. Glanced back at Severa, who was waiting for him in the narrow street outside. Only then did Aragon see that there was a lantern mounted on an iron post beside the street and that the light it cast rendered him visible to the soldiers. He quickly moved from the open doorway and threw away the remnants of his shield. Another crash echoed through the shop, and there was a confusion of footsteps as the soldiers rushed up the back and up a flight of stairs. Aragon scrambled after them. The second story was the living quarters of the family who had escaped. Several people screamed and a baby began to wail as Aragon mounted the remains of small boys that he ignored them, intent as he was on his prey. At last he cornered the soldiers in a cramped sitting room illuminated by a single flickering candle. Aragon slew the 4 soldiers with 4 strokes of his sword, instantly as their blood splattered him. He stabbed his blood, and then paused and studied the corpses. It seemed weird to leave them lying in the middle of the sitting room, so he threw them out of the fire window. As he came back to the stairs, a figure stepped around a corner and stabbed a dagger toward Aragon's ribs. The tip of the dagger stopped a fraction of an inch from Aragon's side, haunted by his words. Startled, Aragon swept Reisinger upward and was about to strike his attacker's head from his shoulders when he realized that the holder of the dagger was a thin boy of no more than 13. Aragon froze. That could be me, he thought. I would have done the same if I were in his shoes. Looking past the boy, he saw a man and a woman standing in their nightgowns and knit caps, clutching each other and staring at him with horror. A tremor ran through Aragon. He lowered Reisinger and, with his free hand, removed the dagger from the boy's now soft grip. If I were you, Aragon said, and the loudness of his voice shocked him, I would not go outside until the battle is over. He hesitated, then added, I'm sorry. Feeling ashamed, he hurried from the shop and rejoined Sapphira. They continued along the street. Not far from the millinery shop, Aragon and Sapphira came across several of King Orin's men carrying gold candlesticks, silver plates and utensils, jewelry, and an assortment of furnishings out of a well-appointed mansion the men had broken into. Aragon dashed a pile of rugs from the arms of one man. Put these things back, he shouted to the entire group. We're here to help these people, not steal from them. They are our brothers and sisters, our mothers and fathers. I'll let you off this once, but spread the word that if you or anyone else goes looting, I'll have you strung up and whipped as the thieves you are. Sapphira growled, emphasizing his point. Under their watchful gaze, the chastened warriors returned the spoils to the marble-clad mansion. Now, Aragon said to Sapphira, maybe we can. Shadeslayer, Shadeslayer, shouted a man, running toward them from deeper within the city. His arms and armor identified him as one of the Varden. Aragon tightened his grip on Reisinger. But, we need your help, Shadeslayer. And yours too, Sapphira. They followed the warrior through Minster until they arrived at a large stone building. Several dozen Varden sat hunched behind a low wall in front of the building. They appeared relieved to see Aragon and Sapphira. Stay back, said one of the Varden as a gesture. There's a whole group of soldiers inside, and they have bows aimed at us. Aragon and Sapphira halted just out of sight of the building. The warrior who had brought them said, the doors and windows are locked. They shoot at us if we try to chop our way in. Aragon looked at Sapphira. Shall I, or shall you? I'll attend to it, she said, and jumped into the air with a rush of spreading wings. The building shook, windows shattering, as Sapphira landed on the roof. Aragon and the other warriors watched with awe as she fit the tips of her claws into the mortared grooves between the stones and, snarling from the effort, tore the building apart until she exposed the terrified soldiers, whom she killed like a terrier. The Varden edged away from her, clearly ferocity. She began licking her paws, putting the gore in her scales. Have I ever told you how glad I am we're not enemies? But it's very sweet. Throughout the city, the soldiers followed a tenacity that impressed Aragon. They gained ground and slow the Vardens' advance. Because of the Varden did not arrive at the western side of the city, where they were stopped until the first faint light of dawn began to spread across the keep was an imposing structure. It was tall and square and adorned with late, so attackers could not set it on fire. In front of the keep was a large courtyard, in which were several low outbuildings and a row of 4 catapults, and encircling the lot was soldiers manned the mountains nearby, arched past and a set of thick open doors. Several thousand of the Varden stood pressed against the curtain wall, and to break through the portcullis with the battering ram they had brought from the main gate of the city, or else to surmount the walls with grappling hooks and ladders, which the lots of either side seemed to have the advantage. The gate, said Aragon, pointing. Saphira swept down from on high and cleared the parapet above the portcullis with a jet of billowing fire, swiftly and furious. She said, "Go. All see to the catapults before they sweep off the walls of the lowered himself to the parapet from her back. It is they who must be she cried. She snarled at the turned and fled inside. The wall was too high for her. Waved her tail over the side and bent her between 2 mountains. Aragon sheathed Risinger, then climbed down, using the spikes on her tail like rungs on a ladder. When he reached the tip, he released his hold and fell the remaining 20 feet. Rolled to lessen the impact as he landed amid the press of Varden. Greetings, Shadesta. Proud, along with the 11 elves. Greetings, Aragon drew Risinger again. Why haven't you already opened the gate of the gate is protected by many spells, Shadesta. It would require much strength to break and shatter. My companions and I are here to protect you. Exhaust ourselves on our tasks. Fighting back at first, Aragon said, would you rather Saphira and I exhaust ourselves, Lockdown? Would that make sense? The elf stared at Aragon. No, growled Aragon. Wait here. Aragon pushed his way to the front of the Varden and strode toward the lowered portcullis. Give me room, he shouted, gesturing at the warriors. The Varden backed away from him, leaving an open area 20 feet across. His words and spinning down a side street. Saphira roared from inside the courtyard, and there came the sounds of timbers breaking and of top rope snapping in twain. Grasping his sword with both hands, Aragon lifted it overhead and shouted, rising. Burst into the fire, the warriors behind him. Aragon stepped forward and slowed one of the walls of his At the same time, Aragon noticed a sudden increase in his fatigue as Risinger severed the boards protecting the portcullis. He smiled, as he got Risinger was sufficient to remove the enchantments. Steady pace, Aragon cut his hand to hold his feet on the portcullis, and set his side flat onto the stones of the street with a discordant clang. He stepped past the grating and walked forward to the open doors recessed farther within the curtain wall. He aligned Risinger with the hairline crack between the 2 doors, his weight behind the sword, and pushed the blade through the narrow gap and out the other side. Then he increased the flow of energy to the fire blazing around the blade, to burn its way through the dense wood as easily as a knife cuts through fresh bread. Copious amounts of smoke billowed from around the blade, making his throat sting and his eyes smart. As soon as he felt the resistance against Risinger's blade rising, the sword extinguished the flame. He wore thick gloves, so he did not shrink from grasping the glowing edges of one door and pulling it open with a mighty heave. The other door also swung outward, seemingly of its own accord, although a moment later, Aragon saw that it was Saphira who had pushed it open. She sat to the right of the entrance, ring-handed with sparkling satin. Catapults lay in her place. Aragon went to stand with Saphira as the Varden poured into the courtyard, filling the air with their clamorous battle cries. Exhausted by his efforts, Aragon placed a hand over the belt of Malak the Wise and bolstered his flagging strength with some of the energy he had stored within the 12 diamonds hidden inside the belt. He offered the rest of it to Saphira, who was equally tired, but she declined, saying, "Keep it for yourself. You haven't that much time. What I wish for is a you and a full night's sleep." Aragon leaned against her and allowed his eyelids to drift halfway closed. "Soon," he said. "Soon this will all be over." "I hope so," she replied. Waters of stream past his Angela. Was paused next to Aragon and, with an "What do you mean?" asked Aragon. She lifted an eyebrow. "Come now, was it really necessary to set your sword on fire?" Aragon's expression cleared as he understood her objection. He laughed. "Not for the portcullis, no, I enjoyed it. Besides, I can't help it. I named the sword fire in the ancient language, and every time I say the word, the blade flares up like a branch of dry wood in a bonfire." "Named your sword fire?" Angela exclaimed with a note of fire. "What kind of a boring name is that? You might as well name your sword Blazing Fire indeed. Sheep fighter or something else with imagination." "I already have one sheep fighter here," said Aragon, and laid a hand on Saphira. "Why would I need another?" Angela broke out into a wide smile. "So you're not entirely devoid of wit after all." And she stand by her side and muttering fire. A soft growl emanated from Saphira, and she said, "Be careful whom you call sheep fighter, Aragon, you might get it yourself." "Yes. Shadow of doom." By then, Argon's fellow elves had joined Aragon and Saphira in the courtyard, but Aragon ignored them and looked for Arya. Arya heeded his call and moved over, her stride as graceful as a gazelle's. She had acquired a shield, a full-sized helm, and a mail hauberk since they had parted, and the metal of her armor gleamed in the gray half-light that pervaded the city. As she came to a stop, Aragon said, "Saphira and I are going to enter with us." Arya agreed with a terse nod. Springing from the ground onto one of Saphira's front legs, Aragon climbed into the saddle. Arya followed his Robert pressing against his back. So lightly, Arya murmured in Aragon's left ear. She wrapped her sword arm around his waist and held him tightly as Saphira felt the touch of Blair's last arm. For a moment, the city below vanished, and he saw and felt only what Blair saw and felt. Sat upon his back, and in Murtaugh's right hand, Zarok shone as bright as a nail. Sorrow filled Glader as he beheld the two miserable hatchlings. He wished he and Oromis did not have to kill them. Once more, he thought, dragon must fight dragon and rider must fight rider, and all because of that egg-breaker Galbatorix. His mood grim, Glader quickened his flapping and spread his claws in preparation for tearing at his oncoming foes. Aragon's head whipped on his neck as Saphira lurched to one side and dropped a score of feet before she regained her equilibrium. "Did you see that sword?" she asked. Do I, said Arya. Saphira flew high above the keep, then floated downward on silent wings and alighted upon the spire of the tallest tower. As Aragon and Arya clambered onto the steep roof, Saphira said, I will meet you in the chamber below. The window here is too small for me. And she took off, the gusts from her wings buffeting them. Aragon and Arya lowered themselves over the edge of the roof and dropped to a narrow stone ledge 8 feet below. Ignoring the vertigo-inducing fall that awaited him if he slipped, Aragon inched along the ledge to a cross-shaped window, where he pulled himself into a large square room lined with sheaves of quarrels and racks of heavy crossbows. If anyone had been in the room when Saphira landed, they had already fled. Arya climbed through the window after him. She inspected the room, then gestured at the stairs in the far corner and padded toward them, her leather boots silent on the stone floor. As Aragon followed her, he sensed a strange confluence of energies below them and also the minds of 5 people whose thoughts were close to him. Concentrated upon reciting a scrap note. He touched Arya on the shoulder and whispered, "What's that?" She nodded. "She brought Bloodline with us." Together, they descended the stairs, making every effort to be quiet. The next room in the tower was much larger than the last. The ceiling was over 30 feet high, and from it hung a lantern with basket panes of glass. The lantern inside. Paintings covered the walls, portraits of people, figures with expressionless face, and children with sharp, flat teeth. These went seascapes depicting the ground crusaders, the sons of battle, and slaughtered men. The shutters sank in and moved all that denoted the balcony with a stone atmosphere. Grass urns filled with white flowers. A lavender dress sat in one of the chairs. The center of the room stood exchanged a perplexed glance with Arya. "It could be a trap," he whispered. "It most likely is," she said. "What should we do? Is Saphira almost here?" "Yes." "Then let us go and greet our host." Matching their steps, they padded down the remaining stairs and snuck across the room, never taking their eyes off the engrossed magicians. "Are you Lady Lorana?" asked Arya in a soft voice as they halted before the seated woman. The woman inclined her head. "That I am, fair elf." She turned her gaze upon Aragon then and said, "And are you the dragon rider of whom we have heard so much about recently?" "Are you Aragon?" said Aragon. A renewed expression appeared upon the woman's distinguished face. "Ah, I had hoped you would come. You must stop them, Shadeslayer." And she gestured at the magicians. "Order them to surrender," whispered Aragon. "I cannot," said Lorana. "They answer only to the voice of rider. I have sworn myself to Galbatorix. I had no choice in the matter, so I cannot raise a hand against him or his servants, otherwise I would have arranged their destruction myself." "Why?" asked Aragon. "What is it you fear so much?" The skin around Lorana's eyes tightened. They know they cannot hope to drive off the Varden as they are, and Galbatorix has not sent reinforcements to our aid. So they are attempting, I do not know how, to create a shade in the hope that the monster will turn against the Varden and spread sorrow and confusion throughout your ranks. Horror enveloped Aragon. He could not imagine having to fight another Durza. But a shade might just as easily turn against him and everyone else in Finster as it would against the Varden. cause as much pain and destruction as they can before they die. They are insane, Shadaslayer. Please, you must stop them, for the sake of my people. As she finished speaking, Saphira landed upon the balcony outside the room, cracking the balcony with her tail. She knocked aside the shutters with a single blow, breaking the frames like so much timber, and pushed the wooden shoulders into the chamber. The magicians continued to chant, seemingly oblivious to her presence. "God," said Lady Lorana, gripping the arms of her chair. "Right," said Aragon. He had surprised the magicians, besting Saphira from the opposite direction. The world reeled around Aragon, and again he found himself peering through his eyes. Red, black, flashes of throbbing yellow, pain, bone-bending pain in his belly and in the shoulder of his left his light Oromus healed his injuries. Glader regained his balance and looked for Thorn. The little red Shrike dragon was stronger and faster than Glader had anticipated, due to Galbatorix's meddling. Thorn slammed into Glader's left side, his weak side, where he had lost his foreleg. They spun around each other, plummeting toward the hard ground and crushing ground. Glader snapped and tore and raked with his hind feet, trying to batter the smaller dragon into submission. "You will not understand, youngling," he vowed to himself. "I was old before you were born." White dagger claws scratched Glader along his ribs and underside. He flexed his tail and struck snarling long fangs across the leg, slapping the back of his tail. The fighting had long since exhausted both of their invisible spell shields, leaving them vulnerable to every sort of wound. When the twirling ground was only a few thousand feet away, Glader inhaled and drew back his head. He tightened his neck, clenched his belly, and drew forth a dense liquid of fire from deep within his belly. As it combined with air in his throat. He opened his jaws to their full extent and sprayed the red dragon with fire, engulfing him in a blizzard. A torrent of hungry, grasping, writhing flames tickled the inside of Glader's cheeks. He closed off his throat, terminating the flow of fire as the squirming, squealing slash-claw dragon pulled away from each other. From off his back, Glader was saying, "Their strength is fading, I can see it in their bearing. Another few minutes and Murtaugh's concentration shall fail and I will be able to assume control over his thoughts. That or we shall slay them with sword and plan." Glader growled and rebuked, frustrated that even Oromus dared not communicate with their minds, as they usually do. Rising on warm wind from tilled earth, he turned toward Thorn, whose limbs dripped with crimson blood, and roared and prepared to grapple with him once more. Aragon stared at the ceiling, disoriented. He was lying on his back in the deep tower, kneeling next to his automatic, reaching on her feet. She grasped him by an arm and helped him upright. Across the room, Aragon saw Saphira shake her head, and he felt her own confusion. Spell rang with unusual force, ere long after they were faded to silence. The man who sat at her feet gripped his knees, his entire body shuddering as he thrashed his head from side to side. "What happened?" asked Arya in a strained undertone. She pulled Aragon closer and lowered her voice even further. "How can you know what Glader is thinking from so far away, and when his mind is closed even to Oromus? Forgive me for touching your thoughts about your condition, Aragon, but I was born in Galbatorix. What sort of a bond do you and Saphira share with Glader?" "Glader," he said, and squared his shoulders. "Did Oromus give you an amulet or some other trinket that allows you to contact him?" To explain. "Glader, I promise." Arya hesitated, then nodded and said, "I shall hold you to that." Together, Aragon, Saphira, and the magicians escorted a separate carnage. The metallic heat filled the room as a Risinger glanced aside before it reached its intended target, wrenching Aragon's shoulder. Likewise, Arya's sword rebounded off a ward, as did Saphira's right front paw. Her claws screeched against the stone floor. "Concentrate on this one," Aragon shouted, and pointed at the tallest spellcaster, a pale man with a snarled beard. "Hurry, before they manage to summon any spirits." Aragon or Arya could have attempted to circumvent or deplete the spellcasters, wards with spells of their own, but using magic against another magician was always a perilous proposition unless the magician's mind was under your control. Neither Aragon nor Arya wanted to risk being killed by the ward they considered them. Attacking in turns, arms, Aragon, Saphira, and Arya cut, stabbed, and battered at the bearded spellcaster. None of their blows touched the man. Then, at last, after only the slightest hint of resistance, Aragon felt something give way beneath Brisinger, and the sword continued on its way and lopped off the spellcaster's head. The air in front of Aragon shimmered. At the same instant, he felt a sudden drain on his strength as his wards defended him from an unknown spell. The assault ceased after a few seconds, leaving him dizzy and lightheaded. His stomach rumbled. He grimaced and fortified himself with energy from the magicians against the death of their companion was to increase the speed of their inhalation. Yellow foam encrusted the corners of their mouths, and spittle flew from their eyes. Still they made no attempt to process they had used on the first mission, alternating moves until they succeeded in wearing down his wards. It was Saphira who slew the man, knocking him through the air with a swipe of her claws. He hit the side of the staircase and cracked open his skull on the corner of a step. This time there was no magical retaliation. As Aragon moved toward the female spellcaster, the cluster of multicolored lights hurried into the room through the broken shutters and converged upon the man seated on the floor. The glowing spirits flashed with angry virulence as they whirled around the man, forming an impenetrable wall. He threw up his arms as if to shield himself and screamed. The air hummed and crackled with the energy that radiated from the flickering orbs. A sour, iron-like taste coated Aragon's tongue. The air on the female spellcaster's face. Across her neck, Saphira raised and arched her back, every muscle of her body. Stop, feeling sick. Gone through. He stronger than he had been when he faced Urza in Trondheim. If anything, he was even more aware of just how dangerous a shade could be. Only 3 warriors had ever survived the killing of a shade: Latri the elf, Ernstad the rider, and himself, and he had no confidence he could duplicate the feat. Glotgarm, where Aragon shouted at his father. Your help. Everything around Aragon winked out of existence, and in its place he beheld whiteness, blank whiteness. The cold soft sky water was soothing against Blair's limbs after the skyline of combat. He lapped at the air, welcoming the thin coat of moisture that accumulated on his dry sticky tongue. He flapped once more to the sky water parting before him, revealing the glaring scorchback sun and the hazy green-brown earth. Where is he? Later wondered. He swung his head, looking for Thorn. The little red shrike dragon had fled high above Gilead, higher than any bird normally flew, where the air was thin and one's breath water smoked. Later, thus, Oro was shattered. He was too slow. The red dragon crashed into his right shoulder, knocking him down. Snarling, he grabbed a single around his scratching ferocious abdomen and screamed to push the breath out of his small body. The red dragon fell and plunged back with a grace, digging his claws into Blair's chest. Blair arched his neck and sank his teeth into his left arm. Held him in place, although the red dragon writhed and kicked like a big wildcat. Hot salty blood filled Blair's mouth. As they plummeted downward, the sound of swords striking his hands, Murtaugh exchanged a flurry of blows. Thorn convulsed, and Blair glimpsed Morrison son Murtaugh. Blair caught the human of the other. That was so long bonded with hands, he still had no expressions of 2 legs no horns, but with their soft, flat faces and their black tails. The clanging of menace ceased. You were not showing yourself soon. Helped us. We could have. Murtaugh seemed to choke on his tongue for a moment. Later, as an unseen voice called to an abrupt halt, he shifted the noose from Thorn's leg, then lifted the board and up the sky, higher and higher, until the broken anvil city was only a faint was richer and deeper than before, and it echoed as if he were standing back in the hall. He felt the scales on his shoulders crawl as he recognized the voice of their ancient foe. So you survived. Later, said Murtaugh. His words were round and smooth, like those of a practiced orator. claim to have my suspicions confirmed. Satisfaction for this. Galbatorix chuckled. Zelda, but the elves forgot everything. Asks each said to me when I stood before you, other elders, anger is a poison. You must purge it from your mind or else it will corrupt your better nature. You should heed your own advice. You cannot confuse me with your snake's tongue, Galbatorix. You are an abomination, and we shall see to it that you are eliminated, even if it costs us our lives. But why should it, Oromis? Why should you pit yourself against me? It saddens me that you have allowed your hate to distort your wisdom, for you were wise once, Oromis, perhaps the wisest member of our entire order. You were the first to recognize the madness of the first to deny my request for another dragon egg. That was very wise of you, Oromis. Evil, wise, and somehow you managed to escape from feeling and forward, after they had broken you, and then you hid until all but one of your enemies had died. That too was wise of you, elf. A brief pause marked Galbatorix's speech. There is no need to continue fighting me. I freely admit that I committed terrible crimes in my youth. Those days are long past, and when I reflect upon the blood I have shed, what would you have me? You cannot undo my deeds. Now, my greatest concern is ensuring the peace and prosperity of the empire over which I find myself lord and master. Cannot you see that I have lost my allegiance? For so many years has burned itself to ashes. Ask yourself this, Oromis, who is responsible for the war that has swept across Algesia? Not I. The Varden were the ones who provoked this conflict. I would have been content to rule my people and leave the elves and the dwarves and the Serdans to their own devices. But the Varden could not leave well enough alone. It was they who chose to steal Saphira's egg, and they who covered the earth with mountains of corpses. Not I. You were wise once before, Oromis, and you can become wise once again. At my side. To this conflict in Russia, for 4,000 years or more. Later was not persuaded. He tightened his crushing, piercing jaws, causing Thorn to yell. The pain noise seemed incredibly loud after Galbatorix's speech. In clear, ringing tones, Oromis said, "No. You cannot make us forget your atrocities. Besides, you have not the means to exchange a reckless banter with a traitor like yourself." Ah, I see that old fool. Galbatorix. Harsh, angry cast. You have been first and foremost among my slaves. I will make you regret your mindless devotion to your so-called justice. And you were wrong. I can keep you thus as long as I want, for I have become as powerful as a god, and there are none who can stop me. You shall not prevail, said Oromis. Even gods do not endure forever. With that Galbatorix uttered a foul oath. Your philosophy does not constrain me, hell. I am the greatest of magicians, and soon I will be even greater still. Death will not take me. You, however, shall die. But first you will suffer. You will both suffer beyond imagining, and then I will kill you, Oromis, and I shall take your heart of hearts, later, and you will serve me until the end of time. Never, exclaimed Oromis. And later again heard the clash of swords on armor. Later had excluded Oromis from his mind for the duration of the fight, but their bond ran deeper than conscious thought, so he felt it when Oromis stiffened, incapacitated by the searing pain of his bone-like nerve rock. Alarmed, later released Thorn's leg and tried to pick the leg up. Thorn held at the impact but remained where he was. Able to move more than a few feet in any direction. There was another metallic clang from above, and then Glader saw Naidling fall past him. The golden sword flashed and gleamed as it tumbled toward the ground. For the first time, a claw of fear gripped Glader. Most of Oromis's wordful energy was stored within the sword, and his words were bound to the blade. Without it, he would be defenseless. Glader threw himself against the limits of Galbatorix's spell, struggling with all his might to break free. In spite of his efforts, however, he could not escape. And just as Oromis began to recover, Glader felt Zarok slash Oromis from shoulder to hip. Glader held. He held as Oromis had held when Glader lost his leg. And an inexorable force gathered inside of Claire's belly. Without pausing to consider whether it was possible, he pushed Thorn and Murtaugh away with a blast of magic, sending them flying like windblown leaves, and then tucked his wings against his sides and dove toward heaven. If he could get there fast enough, then Iceland's Audiator spellcasters would be able to save Oromis. The city was too far away, though. Oromis's consciousness was faltering, fading, floating away. He poured its own strength into Oromis's brain, trying to sustain him until they reached the ground. For all the energy he gave to Oromis, he could not stop the bleeding, the terrible bleeding. Later, release me, Oromis murmured with his mind. A moment later, in an even fainter voice, do not mourn me. Claire's light passed into the void. Gone. Gone. Blackness. Emptiness. He was alone. A crazy haze descended over the world, throbbing in unison with his pulse. He flared his wings and looped back the way he had come, searching for Thorn and his rival. He would not let them escape. He would catch them and tear at them and burn them until he had eradicated them from the world. He later saw the red shrike dragon diving toward him, and he roared his grief and redoubled his speed. The red dragon swerved at the last moment, in an attempt to flank him. He was not fast enough to evade Glader, who lunged and snapped and bit off the last 3 feet of the red dragon's tail. A fountain of blood sprayed from the stump. Yelping in agony, the red dragon wriggled away and darted behind Glader. Glader started to twist around to face him, but the smaller dragon was too quick, too nimble. Glader felt a sharp pain in the base of his skull, and then his vision
Farewell,
failed.
good hunter.
Where was he? He was alone. He was alone and in the dark. He was alone and in the dark, and he could not move or see. He could feel the minds of other creatures close by, but they were not the minds of Thorn and Murtaugh but of Arya, Aragon, and Saphira. And then Glader realized where he was, and the true horror of the situation broke upon him. He fell into the darkness. He held and he held, and he abandoned himself to his agony, not caring what the future might bring, for Oromis was dead, and he was alone. With a start, Aragon returned to himself. He was broken into a ball. Tears streamed his face, gasping, and himself out of Arya. It took him a moment to look and heard the sob. The female spellcaster Aragon had been about to attack him, slain by a single spirit gust. The spirits she and her companions had summoned were nowhere to be seen. Lady Lorana was still ensconced in her chair. Saphira was in the process of struggling to her feet on the opposite side of the room. And the man who had been sitting on the floor amid the 3 other spellcasters was standing next to him. Was now bright crimson, and when he looked at Aragon and smiled, Aragon saw that his eyes had become maroon. In every aspect of appearance and bearing, the man was unrecognizable. Our name is Barab, said the shade. The shade's consciousness was was even stronger than Durza, and Aragon was not sure how long he could withstand the shade's might. He saw that Saphira was also under attack. She sat stiff and motionless by the balcony, a snarl carved on her face. The veins in Arya's forehead bulged, and her face turned red and purple. Her mouth was open, and she was she struck the shade's head. Arms arm set, and for a moment, Arya's toes brushed the floor. The shade's arm popped back into place, and he lifted her even higher. You shall die, growled Barab. You shall all die for imprisoning us in this cold, hard clay. Knowing that Arya's and Saphira's lives were in peril stripped Aragon of every emotion, save that of implacable determination. His thoughts as sharp and clear as a shard of glass, he drove himself at the shade's seething consciousness. Barab was too powerful, and the spirits that resided within him too disparate, for Aragon to overwhelm and control, so Aragon sought to isolate the shade. He surrounded Barab's mind with his own. Every time Barab attempted to reach out towards Saphira or Arya, Aragon caught a mental ray, and every time the shade attempted to shift his body, Aragon counteracted the urge to his own. Fighting back and forth along the shade's mind. as he was, Aragon could not outthink the numerous intelligences contained within the shade. Aragon's concentration eventually wavered, and Varag seized upon the opportunity to force himself into Aragon's mind, trapping him, transfixing him. Spirits raced through his body, forcing down startled them by loosing a long, mournful keen. Still keening, she raked her paws across the floor, chipping and scratching the stones. Her tail whipped from side to side, smashing the furniture and the grim paintings on the walls. Gone, she said. Gone. Gone forever. Saphira, what's wrong? Exclaimed Arya. When Saphira did not answer, Arya repeated the question to Aragon. Hating the words he spoke, Aragon said, Oromas and Glader are dead. Galbatorix killed them. Arya staggered as if she had been hit. Ah, she said. She gripped the back of the chair so hard, her knuckles turned white. Tears filled her slanted eyes, then spilled over onto her cheeks and coursed down her face. Aragon, she reached out and grasped his shoulder, and almost by accident, he found himself holding her in his arms. Aragon felt his own eyes grow wet. He clenched his jaw in an effort to maintain his composure. If he started crying, he would not be able to stop. He and Arya remained locked together for a long while, consoling each other, then Arya withdrew and said, How did it happen? Oromas had one of his seizures, and while he was paralyzed, Galbatorix used her knife. Aragon shook his head. I'll tell you about it along with Nasuda. She should know about this, and I don't want to have to describe it more than once. Arya nodded, then let us go and see her. Sunrise. As Aragon and Arya escorted Lady Lorana down from the room in the tower, they encountered Blodgarm and the 11 other elves running up the staircase 4 steps at a time. Shadeslayer, Arya, explained a female elf with long black hair. Are you hurt? We heard nodded and said, I release you from your vow, Aragon, both of you. No, we are not hurt, Aragon said. However, Oromis and Glader have just died, slain in battle over Gilead. As one, the elves cried out in shock and then began to ply Aragon with dozens of questions. Arya raised a hand and said, restrain yourself. Now is not the time or place to satisfy your curiosity. There are still soldiers about, and we do not know who might be listening. Keep your sorrow hidden within your hearts until we are safe and secure. She paused and looked at Aragon, then said, I will explain the full circumstances of their deaths to you once I know them myself. No Weonada, Arya Drottningu, they murmured. Did you hear my call? Aragon asked Blodgarm. I did, the fur-covered elf said. We came as fast as we could, but there were many soldiers between there and here. Aragon twisted his hand over his chest in the elves' traditional gesture of respect. I apologize for leaving you behind, Blodgarm Elda. The heat of battle made me foolish and overconfident, and you should have died because of my mistake. Slayer. We made a mistake today, one which I promise we shall not repeat. From now on, we will fight alongside you. Together, we went down the stairs to the courtyard outside. Barton had killed or captured most of the soldiers within the gate, and the people were still fighting surrendered once they saw that Lady Lorana was in the custody of the Barden. Since the stairwell was too small for her, Saphira had descended by wing to the courtyard and was waiting for them when they arrived. Aragon stood with Saphira, Arya, and Lady Lorana while one of the Barden fetched Jormungandr. When Jormungandr joined them, they informed him of what had happened in the tower, he answered gravely, and then gave over Lady Lorana to his custody. Jormungandr bowed to her. You may rest assured, lady, we shall treat you with the respect and dignity due your station. We may be confused, but we are still civilized men. Thank you, she replied. I am relieved to hear it. However, my main concern now is for the safety of my subjects. If I might, I would like to speak with your lady, about her plans for them. I believe she wishes to speak with you as well. As they parted, Lady Lorana said, I am most grateful to you, Elf, and to you as well, Dragon Rider, for carrying our monster before you to bring sorrow and destruction upon Finster. Fate has placed us on opposite sides of this conflict, but that does not mean I cannot admire your bravery and prowess. So fare ye well, both of you. Aragon bowed and said, fare ye well, Lady Lorana. The stars watch over you, said Arya. Blodgarm and the elves under his command accompanied Aragon as they searched Finster for Nasuda. They found the Dragon scattered over the gray streets, inspecting the damage to the city. Nasuda greeted Aragon and Saphira with evident relief. I'm glad you have finally returned. We've needed you here these past few days. I see you have a new sword, Aragon, a dragon rider's sword. Did the elves give it to you? In an indirect way, yes. Aragon eyed the various people standing nearby and lowered his voice. Nasuda, we must talk with you alone. It's important. Very well. Nasuda studied the buildings that lined the street, then pointed at a house that appeared abandoned. Let us talk in there. Two of Nasuda's guards, the Nighthawks, ran forward and entered the house. They reappeared a few minutes later and bowed to Nasuda, saying, It's empty, my lady. Good, thank you. She dismounted her steed, handed the reins to one of the men in her retinue, and strode inside. Aragon and Arya followed. The three of them wandered through the shabby building until they found a room, the kitchen, with a window large enough to accommodate Saphira's head. Aragon pushed open the shutters, and Saphira laid her head on the wooden counter. Her breath filled the kitchen with the smell of charred meat. You may speak without fear, Arya announced after casting spells that would prevent anyone from eavesdropping on their conversation. Nasuda rubbed her arms and shivered. What is this all about, Aragon? She asked. Aragon swallowed, wishing that he did not have to dwell upon Oromis and Glair's fate. Then he said, Nasuda, Saphira and I were not alone. There was another dragon and another rider fighting against Galbatorix. I knew it, breathed Nasuda, her eyes shining. It was the only explanation that made sense. They were your teachers in Elsmera, weren't they? They were, said Saphira, but no more. No more. Aragon pressed his lips together and shook his head, tears blurring his vision. Just this morning they died at Gilead. Galbatorix used Thorn and Murtaugh to kill them. I heard him speak to them with Murtaugh's tongue. The excitement drained from Masuda's face, replaced by a dull, empty expression. She sank into the nearest chair and stared at the cinders in the cold fireplace.
Very well.
The kitchen was silent. At last she stirred and said, "Are you sure they are dead?" "Yes." Masuda wiped her eyes on the hem of her sleeve. "Tell me about them, Aragon. Would you, please?" So for the next half hour, Aragon spoke of Oromus and Glader. He explained how they had survived the fall of the riders and why they had chosen to keep themselves hidden thereafter. He explained about their respective disabilities, and he spent some time describing their personalities and what it had been like to study under them. Aragon's sense of loss deepened as he remembered the long days he had spent with Oromus on the crags of Telnair and the many things the elf had done for him and Saphira. As he came to their encounter with Thorn and Murtaugh at Gilead, Saphira lifted her head off the counter and began to keen again, her mournful wail soft and persistent. Afterward, Masuda sighed and said, "I wish I could have met Oromus and Glader, but alas, it was not to be. There is one thing I still do not understand, Aragon. You said you heard Galbatorix speaking to them. How could you?" "Yes, I would like to know that as well," said Arya. Aragon called for something to drink, but there was no water or wine in the kitchen. He coughed, then launched into an account of their recent trip to Elsmera. Saphira occasionally made a comment, but for the most part, she left it to him to tell the story. Starting with the truth about his parentage, Aragon proceeded in quick succession through the events of their stay, from their discovery of the bright steel under the Mennoa tree to the forging of Brisinger to his visit with Sloane. Last of all, he told Arya and Masuda about the dragon's heart of hearts. "Well," said Masuda, she stood and walked the length of the kitchen and then back again. "You the son of Brahm, and Galbatorix leeching off the souls of dragons whose bodies have died. It's almost too much to comprehend." She rubbed her arms again. "At least we now know the true source of Galbatorix's power." Arya stood motionless, breathless, her expression stunned. "The dragons are still alive," she whispered. She clasped her hands together in a prayer-like fashion and held them against her chest. "They are still alive after all these years. Oh, if only we could tell the rest of my race. How they would rejoice, and how terrible their wrath would be when they heard of the enslavement of the elders. We would run straight to you, and we would not rest until we had freed the hearts of Galbatorix's control, no matter how many of us died in the process." "We cannot tell them," said Saphira. "No," said Arya, and lowered her gaze. "We cannot, but I wish we could." Masuda looked at her. "Please do not take offense, but I wish that your mother, Queen Islandzadi, had seen fit to share this information with us. We could have made use of it long ago." "I agree," said Arya, frowning. "On the burning plains, Murtaugh was able to defeat the two of you," she indicated Aragon and Saphira, "because you did not know that Galbatorix might have given him some of the Elvenari and thus you failed to act with appropriate caution. If not for Murtaugh's conscience, you would both be trapped in Galbatorix's service even now. Oromus and Glader, and my mother too, had sound reasons for keeping the Elvenari in secret. Their reticence was merely our undoing. I will discuss this with my mother when next we speak." The fireplace. "You have given me much to think about, Aragon." She tapped the floor with the tip of her boot. "For the first time in the history of the Varden, we know of a way to kill Galbatorix that might actually succeed. It can be separated from his other parts. Strength, and then you would have spellcasters to be able to make power. Yes, but how can we separate him from his hearts?" Aragon asked. Masuda shrugged. "I could not say, but I am sure it must be possible. From now on, nothing else is important." Aragon felt Arya studying with an unusual concentration. Unsettled, he made a questioning face at her. "I always wondered," said Arya, "why Saphira's egg appeared to you, and not somewhere in an empty field. It seemed too great a coincidence to have occurred purely by chance, but I could not think of any plausible explanation. Now I understand. I should have guessed that you were Brom's son. I did not know Brom well, but I did know him. You share a certain resemblance." "I do. You should be proud to call Brom your father," said Masuda. "By all accounts, he was a remarkable man. If not for him, the Varden wouldn't exist. It seems fitting that you are the one to carry on his work." Then Arya said, "Aragon, may we seek Lairs Eldenari. Aragon hesitated, then went outside and retrieved the pouch from Saphira's saddlebags. Careful not to touch the Eldenari, he loosened the drawstring at the top and allowed the pouch to slide down around the golden, gem-like stone. In contrast to when he had last seen it, the glow within the Heart of Hearts was dim and feeble, as if Glader were barely conscious. Nasuda leaned forward and stared into the swirling center of the Eldenari, her eyes gleaming with reflected light. And Glader is really inside of here. He is, said Saphira. Can I speak with him? You could try, but I doubt he would respond. He just lost his rider. It will take him a long time to recover from the shock, if ever. Please leave him be, Nasuda. If he wished to speak with you, he would have done so already. Of course, it was not my intention to disturb him in his time of grief. I shall wait to meet him until such time as he has regained his composure. Arya moved closer to Aragon and placed her hands on either side of the Eldenari, her fingers less than an inch away from its surface. She gazed at the stone with an expression of reverence, seemingly lost within its depths, then whispered something in the ancient language. Blair's consciousness flared slightly, as if in response. Arya lowered her hands. Aragon, Saphira, you have been given the most solemn responsibility, the safekeeping of another life. Whatever happens, you must protect Glader. With Oromas gone, we shall need his strength and wisdom more than ever before. Do not worry, Arya, we won't allow any misfortune to befall him, Saphira promised. Aragon covered the Eldenari with the pouch again and fumbled with the drawstring, exhaustion rendering him clumsy. The Varden had won an important victory and the elves had taken Gilead, but the knowledge brought him little joy. He looked at Nasuda and asked, what now? Nasuda lifted her chin. Now, she said, we will march north to Bellatona, and when we get back to Bangor, proceed onward to Drosleona and seize its wealth, and then to Eurostate, where we will pass down the Elderworks of Daikani. That is what we shall do now, Aragon. After they left Nasuda, Aragon and Saphira agreed to leave Finster for the Varden's camp so that they could both rest undisturbed by the cacophony of noises within the city. With Blodgarm and the rest of Aragon's guards ranged around them, they walked toward the main gates of Finster, Aragon still carrying Blair's Heart of Hearts in his arms. Neither of them spoke. Aragon stared at the ground between his feet. He paid little attention to the men who ran or marched past. His heart in the battle was finished. All he wanted to do was forget the sorrows of the day. The last sensations he had felt from Glader still reverberated through his mind. He was alone. He was alone and in the dark. Alone. Aragon's breath caught as a wave of nausea swept over him. So that is what it's like to lose your rider or your dragon. No wonder Galbatorix went insane. We are the last, Saphira said. Aragon frowned, not understanding. The last free dragon and rider, she explained. We are the only ones left. We are alone. Yes. Aragon stumbled as his foot struck a loose stone he had overlooked. Miserable, he closed his eyes for a moment. We can't do this by ourselves, he thought. We're not ready, said Glader, and her grief and anxiety, combined with his, nearly incapacitated. When they arrived at the stations, Aragon paused, reluctant to push his way through the large crowd gathered in trying to prove his point. He glanced around for another route. As his eyes passed over the outer walls, a sudden desire gripped him to see the city in the light of day. Veering away from Saphira, he ran up a staircase that led to the top of the walls. Saphira uttered a short growl of annoyance and followed, half opening her wings as she jumped from the street to the parapet in a single bound. They stood together on the battlements for the better part of an hour and watched as the sun rose. One by one, rays of pale gold light streaked across the verdant fields from the east, illuminating the countless motes of dust that drifted through the air. Where the rays struck a column of smoke, the smoke glowed orange and red and billowed with renewed urgency. The fires among the hovels outside the city walls had mostly died out, although since Aragon and Saphira had arrived, the fighting had set a score of houses within Finster ablaze, and the pillars of flame that leapt up from the disintegrating houses lent the cityscape an eerie beauty. Behind Finster, the shimmering sea stretched out to the far, flat horizon, where the sails of a ship plowing its way northward were just visible. As the sun warmed Aragon through his armor, his melancholy gradually dissipated like the wreaths of mist that adorned the first road. He took a deep breath and exhaled, relaxing his muscles. No, he said, we are not alone. I have you, and you have me. And there is Arya and Nasuda and many others besides who will help us along our way. gazed down at the Eldenari that lay covered within his arms and felt a rush of sympathy and protectiveness toward the dragon who was trapped inside the Heart of Hearts. He hugged the stone closer to his chest and laid a hand upon Saphira, grateful for their companionship. We can do this, he thought. Against him. We can do this. We can, and we must, said Saphira. For the sake of our and for the rest of Algesia. Aragon lifted Claire's Eldenari over his head, presenting it to the sun in the new day, and he smiled, eager for the battles yet to come, so that he and Saphira might finally confront Galbatorix and kill the Dark King. Here ends the third book of the Inheritance Cycle. The story will continue and conclude in Book 4, on the origin of names. To the casual observer, the various names an intrepid traveler will encounter throughout Algesia might seem but a random collection of labels with no inherent integrity, culture, or Contents. Master, Table of Contents. Cover. Title page. Copyright. Dedication. In the beginning. In the beginning. A history of Aragon, eldest, and Brisinger. In the beginning, there were dragons, proud, fierce, and independent. Their scales were like gems, and all who gazed upon them despaired, for their beauty was great and terrible. And they lived alone in the land of Algesia for ages uncounted. Then the Nile the sky of sturdy dwarfs from the stone of the Haderach desert. And their two races warred much. Then the elves sailed to Algesia from across the silver sea. They too warred with the dragons. The elves were stronger than the dwarves, and they would have destroyed the dragons, even as the dragons would have destroyed the elves. And so a truce was struck and a pact was sealed between the dragons and the elves. And by this joining, they created the dragon riders, who kept the peace throughout Algesia for thousands of years. Then humans sailed to Algesia, and the horned Urgals, and the Rizak, who are the hunters in the dark and the eaters of men's flesh. And the humans also joined the pact with the dragons. Then a young dragon rider, Galbatorix, rose up against his own kind. He enslaved the black dragon Shrukin and he convinced 13 other riders to follow him. And the 13 were called the Forsworn. And Galbatorix and the Forsworn cast down the riders and burned their city on the Isle of Vroingard and slew every dragon not their own, save for 3 eggs, 1 red, 1 blue, 1 green. And from each dragon they took the Heart of Hearts, the Eldenari, that holds the might and mind of the dragons, apart from their flesh. And for 82 years, Galbatorix reigned supreme among the humans. The Forsworn died, but not he, for his strength was that of all the dragons, and none could hope to strike him down. In the 83rd year of Galbatorix's rule, a man stole from his castle the blue dragon egg. And the egg passed into the care of those who still fought against Galbatorix, those who were known as the Varden. The elf Arya carried the egg between the Varden and the elves in search of the human or elf for whom it would hatch. And in this manner, 25 years passed. Then, as Arya traveled to the elven city of Ocelon, a group of Urgals attacked her and her guards. The Urgals was the Shade Urza, a sorcerer possessed by the spirits he had summoned to do his bidding. After the death of the Forsworn, he had become Galbatorix's most feared servant. The Urgals slew Arya's guards, and before they and the Shade captured her, Arya sent the egg away with magic, toward one who she hoped could protect it. But her spell went awry. And so it came to pass that Aragon, an orphan of only 5 and 10 years, found the egg within the mountains of the Spire. He took the egg to the farm where he lived with his uncle, Garrow, and his only cousin, Roran. And the egg hatched for Aragon, and he raised the dragon therein. And her name was Saphira. Then Galbatorix sent 2 of the Rizak to find and retrieve the egg, and they slew Garrow and burnt Aragon's home. For Galbatorix had enslaved the Rizak, and of them only a few remained. Aragon and Saphira set out to avenge themselves on the Rizak. With them went the storyteller Brom, who had once been a dragon rider himself, ere the fall of the riders. It was to Brom that the elf Arya had been to send the blue egg. Brom taught Aragon much about swordsmanship, magic, and honor. And he gave to Aragon Zarok, that had once been the sword of Morzin, first and most powerful of the Forsworn. But the Rizak slew Brom when next they met, and Aragon and Saphira only escaped with the help of a young man, Murtaugh, son of Morzin. During their travels, the Shade Durza captured Aragon in the city of Gilead. Aragon managed to free himself, and his friend Arya from her cell. Arya was poisoned and gravely wounded, so Aragon, Saphira, and Murtaugh took her to the Varden, who lived among the dwarves in the Vior Mountains. There Arya was healed, and there Aragon blessed a squalling infant by the name of Elba, blessed her to be shielded from misfortune. But Aragon spoke badly, and without realizing it, he cursed her, and his curse forced her to instead become a shield for others' misfortune. Soon thereafter, Galbatorix sent a great army of Urgles to attack the dwarves and the Varden. And it was in the battle that followed that Aragon slew the Shade Durza. But Durza gave Aragon a grievous wound across his back, and Aragon suffered terrible pain because of it, despite the spells of the Varden's healers.
You there?
And in his pain, he
Okay,
heard a
I'll
voice.
stand back.
And the voice said, "Come to me, Aragon. Come to me, for I have answers to all you ask." 3 days after, the leader of the Varden, Jumon, was ambushed and killed by Urgles under the command of a pair of magicians, twins, who betrayed the Varden to Galbatorix. The twins also abducted Murtaugh and spirited him away to Galbatorix. To Aragon and everyone in the Varden, it looked as if Murtaugh had died, and Aragon was much saddened. And Ajahad's daughter, Nasuda, became leader of the Varden. From Trondheim, the seat of the dwarves, Power, Aragon, Saphira, and Arya traveled to the northern forest of the Weldenvarden, where lived the elves. With them went the dwarf Oric, nephew of the dwarf king, Hrothgar. In Du Weldenvarden, Aragon and Saphira met with Oromas and Blader, the last free-riding dragon, who had lived in hiding all the past century, waiting to instruct the next generation of dragon riders. And Aragon and Saphira also met with Queen Islandzadi, ruler of the elves and mother to Arya.
You're a skilled hunter.
While Oromas and Blader trained Aragon and Saphira, Galbatorix sent the Rizak and a group of soldiers to Aragon's home village of Carbahal, this time to capture his cousin, Roran. The Roran came, and they could not be found and acknowledged the butcher Sloan. For Sloan murdered a watchman so as to let the Rizak into the village, they might take Roran unawares. Roran fought his way free, but the Rizak stole from him Katrina, Roran's beloved and Sloane's daughter. Then Roran convinced the villagers to leave with him, and they journeyed through the mountains of the Spine, down the coast of Alagizia, and to the southern country of Serda, which yet existed independent of Galbatorix. The wound upon Aragon's back continued to torment him. But during the Elves' Blood Oath celebration, wherein they celebrate the pact between the riders and the dragons, his wound was healed by the spectral dragon the Elves invoke upon the conclusion of the festival. Moreover, the apparition gave Aragon strength and speed equal to those of the Elves themselves. Then Aragon and Saphira flew to Serda, where Nasuda had taken the Varden to launch an attack against Galbatorix's empire. There the Urgles allied themselves with the Varden, for they claimed that Galbatorix had clouded their minds, and they would have their revenge against him. With the Varden, Aragon met again the girl Elba, who had grown with prodigious speed because of his spell. From a squalling infant to a girl of 3 or 4 she had become, and her gaze was dire indeed, for she knew the pain of all those around her. And not far from the border of Serda, upon the blackness of the burning plains, Aragon, Saphira, and the Varden fought a great and bloody battle against Galbatorix's army. In the midst of the battle, Loren and the villagers joined the Varden, as did the dwarves, who had marched after them from the Vior Mountains. Without a beast rose a huge cloud and polished iron. And he rode upon a glittering red dragon, and with a spell, he slew King Hrothgar. Then Aragon and Saphira fought the rider of this red dragon. When they discovered the rider was Murtaugh, now bound to Galbatorix with oaths unbreakable. And the dragon was born, the second of the 3 eggs to hatch. Murtaugh defeated Aragon and Saphira with the sword of the Elvenari that Galbatorix had given him. But Murtaugh allowed Aragon and Saphira to go free, for Murtaugh still bore a friendship for Aragon. And because, as he told Aragon, they were brothers, both born of Morzen's favored consort, Selena. Then Murtaugh took Zarok, their father's sword, from Aragon, and he and Thorn withdrew from the burning plains, as did the rest of Galbatorix's forces. Upon completion of the battle, Aragon, Saphira, and Roran flew to the Dark Tower of Stone, Helgrind, that served as the Rizak's hiding place. They slew one of the Rizak, and the Rizak's foul parents, the Lether Blaka, and from Helgrind rescued Katrina. And in one of the cells, Aragon discovered Katrina's father, blind and half dead. Aragon considered killing Sloane for his betrayal, but rejected the idea. Instead, he put Sloane into a deep sleep and told Roran and Katrina that her father was dead. Then he asked Saphira to take Roran and Katrina back to the Varden while he hunted down the final Rizak. Alone, Aragon slew the last remaining Rizak. Then he took Sloane away from Helgrind. After much thought, Aragon discovered Sloane's true name in the ancient language, the language of power and magic. And Aragon bound Sloane with his name and forced the butcher to swear that he would never see his daughter again. Then Aragon sent him to live among the elves. But what Aragon did not tell the butcher was that the elves would repair his eyes if he repented of his treason and murder. Arya met Aragon halfway to the Varden, and together they returned, on foot and through enemy territory. At the Varden, Aragon learned that Queen Islandzadi had sent 12 elven spellcasters, led by an elf named Blodgarm, to protect him and Saphira. Aragon then removed as much of his curse as he could from the girl Elva, but she retained her ability to feel the pain of others, though she no longer felt the compulsion to save them from their misery. And Roran married Katrina, who was pregnant, and for the first time in a long while, Aragon was happy. Then Murtaugh, Thorn, and a group of Galbatorix's men attacked the Varden. With the help of the elves, Aragon and Saphira were able to hold them off, but neither Aragon nor Murtaugh could defeat the other. It was a difficult battle, for Galbatorix had enchanted the soldiers so that they felt no pain, and the Varden suffered many casualties. Afterward, Asuna sent Aragon to represent the Varden among the dwarves while they chose their new king. Aragon was loath to go, for Saphira had to stay and protect the Varden's camp. But go he did. And Roran served alongside the Varden, and he rose through their ranks, for he proved himself a skilled warrior and a leader of men. While Aragon was among the dwarves, 7 of them tried to assassinate him. An investigation revealed that the clan as Swelden Rak Anwin was behind the attack. The clan meet continued, however, and Oric was chosen to succeed his uncle. Saphira joined Aragon for the coronation, and during it, she fulfilled her promise to repair the dwarves' cherished star sapphire, which she had broken during Aragon's battle with the Shade Rizak. Then Aragon and Saphira returned to Dueldenvarden. There Oromis revealed the truth about Aragon's heritage, that he was not, in fact, Morzen's son but Brahms, though he and Murtaugh did share the same mother, Selena. Oromis later also explained the concept of the Elvenarm, which a dragon may choose to disgorge while living, but this must be done with great care, for whosoever owns the Elvenari may use it to control the dragon it came from. While in the forest, Aragon decided that he needed a sword to replace Sarok. Remembering the advice he had gotten from the werecat Solembum during his journeys with Brahm, Aragon went to the sentient Menoa tree in Dueldenvarden. He spoke with the tree, and the tree agreed to give up the bright steel beneath its roots in exchange for an unnamed price. Then the elf smith Runan, who had forged all of the riders' swords, worked with Aragon to make a new blade for him. The sword was blue, and Aragon named it Brisinger, fire. And the blade burst into flame whenever he spoke its name. Then Glader gave trust of his heart of hearts to Aragon and Saphira, and they made their way back to the Varden, while Glader and Oromis joined the rest of their kind as they attacked the northern part of the empire. Was transformed into the shape of Rob. And with Aragon's help, Arya slew Rob. As they did, Oromis and Glader fought Murtaugh and Thorn. And Galbatorix reached out and took command of Murtaugh's mind. And with Murtaugh's arm, Galbatorix struck down Oromis, and Thorn slew Glair's body. And though the Varden were victorious at Finster, Aragon and Saphira mourned the loss of their teacher, Oromis. But still the Varden continued, and even now they march deeper into the Empire, toward the capital, Uruibane, wherein sits Galbatorix, proud, confident, and disdainful, for his is the strength of the dragons. Into the breach. The dragon Saphira roared, and the soldiers before her quailed. With me, shouted Aragon. He lifted Brisinger over his head, holding it aloft for all to see. The blue sword flashed right in the west, stark against the wall of black clouds building in the west. For the Varden, an arrow whizzed past him, he paid it no mind. The warriors gathered at the base of the slope of Rebel Aragon and Saphira were standing upon answered him with a single, full-throated bellow, the Varden. They brandished their own weapons and charged forward, scrambling up the tumbled blocks of stone. Aragon turned his back to the men. On the other side of the mound lay a wide courtyard. 200 or so of the Empire's soldiers stood huddled within. Behind them rose a tall, dark-keep with narrow slits for windows and several square towers, the tallest of which had a lantern shining in its upper roofs. Somewhere within the keep, Aragon knew, was Lord Bradley, governor of Bellatona, the city the Varden had been fighting to capture for several long hours. With a cry, Aragon leapt off the rebel toward the soldiers. The men shuffled backward, although they kept their spears and pikes trained on the ragged hole Saphira had torn in the castle's outer wall. Aragon's right ankle twisted as he landed. He fell to his knee and caught himself on the ground with his sword hand. One of the soldiers seized the opportunity to dart out of formation and stab his spear at Aragon's exposed area. Aragon gave him a thrust with a flick of his wrist, swinging Brisinger faster than either a human or an elf could follow. The soldier's face went slack with fear as he realized his mistake. He tried to flee, but before he could move more than a few inches, Aragon lunged forward and took him in the gut. With a pennant of blue and yellow flame streaming from her maw, Saphira jumped into the courtyard after Aragon. He crouched and tensed his legs as she struck the paved ground. The impact shook the entire courtyard. Many of the chips of glass that formed a large, colorful mosaic in front of the keep popped loose and flew spinning upward like coins bounced off a drum. Above, a pair of shutters banged open and closed in a window of the building. The elf Arya accompanied Saphira. Her long black hair billowed wildly around her angular face as she sprang off the pile of rubble. Lines of splattered blood striped her arms and neck, gore smeared the blade of her sword. She alit with a soft scuff of leather against stone. Her presence hardened Aragon. There was no one else whom he would rather have fighting alongside him and Saphira. She was, he thought, the perfect shield mate. He loosed a quick smile at her, and Arya responded in kind, her expression fierce and joyous. In battle, her reserved demeanor vanished, replaced by an openness that she rarely displayed elsewhere. Aragon ducked behind his shield as a rippling sheet of blue fire appeared between them. From beneath the rim of his helm, he watched as Saphira bathed the cowering soldiers in the torrent of flames that flowed around them, yet caused them no harm. A line of archers on the battlements of the castle keep let fly a volley of arrows at Saphira. The arrows burst into fire in midair and crumbled to ash, while the magical wards Aragon had placed around Saphira deflected the rest. One of the stray arrows rebounded off Aragon's shield with a hollow thud, denting it. The blue flame suddenly enveloped 3 of the soldiers, killing them so quickly, they did not even have time to scream. The other soldiers clustered in the center of the inferno, the blades of their spears and pikes reflecting flashes of bright blue light. Try though she might, Saphira could not so much as singe the survivors. At last she abandoned her efforts and closed her jaws with a definitive snap. The fire's absence left the courtyard startlingly quiet. It occurred to Aragon, as it had several times before, that whoever had killed the soldiers' rewards must have been a skilled and powerful magician. Was it Murtaugh? He wondered. If so, why aren't he and Thorn here to defend Bellatona? Doesn't Galbatorix care to keep control of the cities? Aragon ran forward and, with a single stroke of rising, lopped off the tops of a dozen polearms as easily as he had flicked off the seed heads of barley stalks when he was younger. He slashed the nearest soldier across the chest, slicing through his helm as if it were the flimsiest of cloth. A fountain of blood rose. Then Aragon stabbed the next soldier in line and struck the soldier to his left with his shield, knocking the man into 3 of his companions and bowling them over. The soldiers' reactions seemed slow and clumsy to Aragon as he danced through their ranks, cutting them down with impunity. Saphira waded into the fray to his left, batting the soldiers into the air with her enormous paws, lashing them with her spiked tail, and biting and killing them with a shake of her head, while, to his right, Arya was a blur of motion, every swing of her sword signaling death for another servant of the Empire. When Aragon spun around to evade a pair of spears, he saw the fur-covered elf Blodgarm close behind, as well as the 11 other elves whose task it was to guard him and Saphira. Farther back, the Varden poured into the courtyard through the gap in the castle's outer wall, but the men refrained from attacking. It was too dangerous to go anywhere near Saphira. Neither she nor Aragon nor the elves required assistance in disposing of the soldiers. The battle soon swept Aragon and Saphira apart, carrying them to opposite ends of the courtyard. Aragon was not concerned. Even without her wards, Saphira was more than capable of defeating a large group of 20 or 30 humans by herself. The spear thudded against Aragon's shield, bruising his shoulder. He whirled toward the thrower, a big, scarred man missing his lower front teeth, and sprinted at him. The man struggled to draw a dagger from his belt. At the last moment, Aragon twisted, tensed his arms and chest, and rammed his sore shoulder into the man's sternum. The force of the impact drove the soldier backward several yards, whereupon he collapsed, clutching at his heart. Then a hail of black-fletched arrows fell, killing or injuring many of the soldiers. Aragon shied away from the missiles and covered himself with his shield, even though he was confident his magic would protect him. It would not do to become careless. He never knew when an enemy spellcaster might fire an enchanted arrow that could breach his wards. A bitter smile twisted Aragon's lips. The archers above had realized that their only hope of victory lay in somehow killing Aragon themselves, no matter how many of their own they had to sacrifice to do so. "You're too late," thought Aragon with great satisfaction. "You should have left the Empire while you still had the chance." The onslaught of clattering arrows gave him the chance to rest for a moment, which he welcomed. The attack on the city had begun at daybreak, and he and Saphira had been at its forefront the whole while. Once the arrows ceased, Aragon transferred Brisinger to his left hand, picked up one of the soldiers' spears, and heaved it at the archers 40 feet above. As Aragon had discovered, spears were difficult to throw accurately without substantial practice. It did not surprise him, then, when he missed the man he was aiming for, but he was surprised when he missed the entire line of archers on the battlements. The spear sailed over him and shattered against the castle wall overhead. The archers laughed and jeered, making rude gestures. A swift movement at the periphery of his vision caught Aragon's attention. He looked just in time to see Arya launch her own spear at the archers, but in real two who were standing close together. Then Arya pointed at the men with her sword and said, "Brisinger." And the spear burst into a green fire. The archers shrank from the burning corpses and, as one, fled from the battlements, crowding through the doorways that led to the upper levels of the castle. "That's not fair," Aragon said. "I can't use that spell, not without my sword flaring up like a bonfire." Arya gazed at him with a faint hint of amusement. The fighting continued for another few minutes, whereupon the remaining soldiers either surrendered or tried to flee. Aragon allowed the 5 men in front of him to run away. He knew they would not get far. After a quick examination of the bodies that lay sprawled around him to confirm that they were indeed dead, he looked back across the courtyard. Some of the Varden had opened the gates in the outer wall and were carrying a battering ram through the street leading to the castle. Others were assembling in ragged lines next to the keep door, ready to enter the castle and confront the soldiers within. Among them stood Aragon's cousin, Roran, gesturing with his ever-present hammer while he issued orders to the detachment under his command. At the far end of the courtyard, Saphira crouched over the corpses of her kills, the area around her a shambles. Beads of blood clung to her gem-like scales, the spots of red in startling contrast to the blue of her body. She threw back her spiky head and roared her triumph, drowning out the clamor of the city with the ferocity of her cry. Then, from inside the castle, Aragon heard the rattle of gears and chains, followed by the scrape of heavy wooden beams being drawn back. The sounds attracted everyone's gaze to the doors of the keep. With a hollow boom, the doors parted and swung open. A thick cloud of smoke from the torches within billowed outward, causing the nearest of the Varden to cough and cover their faces. From somewhere in the depths of the gloom came the drumming of ironclad hooves against the paving stones, then a horse and rider burst forth from the center of the smoke. In his left hand, the rider held what Aragon first took to be a common lance, but he soon noticed that it was made of a strange green material and had a barbed blade forged in an unfamiliar pattern. A faint glow surrounded the head of the lance, the unnatural light betraying the presence of magic. The rider tugged on the reins and angled his horse toward Saphira, who began to rear onto her hind legs, in preparation for delivering a terrible, killing blow with her right front paw. Concern clutched at Aragon. The rider was too sure of himself, the lance too different, too eerie. Though her wards ought to protect her, Aragon was certain Saphira was in mortal danger. "I won't be able to reach her in time," he realized. He cast his mind toward the rider, but the man was so focused on his task that he did not even notice Aragon's presence, and his unwavering concentration prevented Aragon from gaining more than superficial access to his consciousness. Withdrawing into himself, Aragon reviewed a half-dozen words from the ancient language and composed a simple spell to stop the galloping warhorse in his tracks. It was a desperate act, for Aragon knew not if the rider was a magician himself or what precautions he might have taken against being attacked with magic, but Aragon was not about to stand by idly when Saphira's life was at risk. Aragon filled his lungs. He reminded himself of the correct pronunciation of several difficult sounds in the ancient language. Then he opened his mouth to deliver the spell. Fast as he was, the elves were faster still. Before he could utter a single word, a frenzy of low chanting erupted behind him, the overlapping voices forming a discordant and unsettling melody. May, he managed to say, and then the elves' magic took effect. The mosaic in front of the horse stirred and shifted, and the chips of glass flowed like water. A long rift opened up in the ground, a gaping crevice of uncertain depth. With a loud scream, the horse plunged into the hole and pitched forward, breaking both of its front legs. As horse and rider fell, the man in the saddle drew back his arm and threw the glowing lance toward Saphira. Saphira could not run. She could not dodge. So she swung a paw at the dart, hoping to knock it aside. She missed, however, by a matter of inches, and Aragon watched with horror as the lance sank a yard or more into her chest, just under her collarbone. A pulsing veil of rage descended over Aragon's vision. He drew upon every store of energy available to him, his body, the sapphire set in the pommel of his sword, the 12 diamonds hidden in the belt of Beloth the Wise wrapped round his waist, and the massive store within Aaron, the elf ring that graced his right hand, as he prepared to obliterate the rider, heedless of the risk. Aragon stopped himself, however, when Blodgarm appeared, leaping over Saphira's left foreleg. The elf landed on the rider like a panther pouncing on a deer, and knocked the man onto his side. With a savage twist of his head, Blodgarm tore open the man's throat with his long white teeth. A shriek of all-consuming despair emanated from a window high above the open entrance to the keep, followed by a fiery explosion that ejected blocks of stone from within the building, blocks that landed amid the assembled Varden, crushing limbs and torsos like dry twigs. Aragon ignored the stones raining on the courtyard and ran to Saphira, barely aware of Arya and his guards accompanying him. Other elves, who had been closer, were already clustering around her, examining the lance that projected from her chest. "How badly is she?" Aragon said, too upset to complete his sentences. He yearned to speak to Saphira with his mind, but as long as enemy spellcasters might be in the area, he dared not expose his consciousness to her, lest his foes spy on his thoughts or assume command over his body. After a seemingly interminable wait, Werden, one of the male elves, said, "You may thank fate, Shadeslayer." The lance missed the major veins and arteries in her neck. "It hit only muscle, and muscle we can mend. Can you remove it? Does it have any spells that would keep it from being?" "We shall attend to it, Shadeslayer." Grave as priests gathered before an altar, all the elves, save Blodgarm, placed the palms of their hands on Saphira's breast and, like a whisper of wind ghosting through a stand of willow trees, they sang. Of warmth and growth they sang, of muscle and sinew and pulsing blood they sang, and of other, more arcane subjects. With what must have been an enormous effort of will, Saphira held her position throughout the incantation, though fits of tremors shook her body every few seconds. A thread of blood rolled down her chest from the shaft embedded within. As Blodgarm moved to stand next to him, Aragon spared a glance for the elf. Gore matted the fur on his chin and neck, darkening its shade from midnight blue to solid black. "What was that?" Aragon asked, indicating the flames still dancing in the window high above the courtyard. Blodgarm licked his lips, baring his cat-like fangs, before answering. "In the moment before he died, I was able to enter the soldier's mind, and through it, the mind of the magician who was assisting him." "You killed the magician." "In a manner of speaking, I forced him to kill himself. I would not normally resort to such an extravagant display of matrix, but I was aggravated." Aragon started forward, then checked himself when Saphira uttered a long, low moan as, without anyone touching it, the lance began to slide out of her chest. Her eyelids fluttered and she took a series of quick, shallow breaths while the last 6 inches of the lance emerged from her body. The barbed blade, with its faint nimbus of emerald light, fell to the ground and bounced against the paving stones, sounding more like pottery than metal. When the elves stopped singing and lifted their hands from Saphira, Aragon rushed to her side and touched her neck. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her how frightened he had been, to join his consciousness with hers. Instead, he settled for looking up into one of her brilliant blue eyes and asking, "Are you all right?" The words seemed paltry when compared with the depth of his emotion. Saphira replied with a single blink, then lowered her head and caressed his face with a gentle puff of warm air from her nostrils. Aragon smiled. Then he turned to the elves and said, Aka el Renono, Althea, Weil Forn Thornissa, thanking them in the ancient language for their help. The elves who had participated in the healing, including Arya, bowed and twisted their right hands over the center of their chests in a gesture of respect peculiar to their race. Aragon noticed that more than half of the elves assigned to protect him and Saphira were pale, weak, and unsteady on their feet. Fall back and rest, he told them. You'll only get yourselves killed if you stay. Go on, that's an order. Though Aragon was sure they hated to leave, the 7 elves responded with, as you wish, Shadeslayer, and withdrew from the courtyard, striding over the corpses and rubble. They appeared noble and dignified, even when at the limits of their endurance. Then Aragon joined Arya and Blodgarm, who were studying the lance, a strange expression on both their faces, as if they were uncertain how they ought to react. Aragon squatted next to them, careful not to allow any part of his body to brush against the weapon. He stared at the delicate lines carved around the base of the blade, lines that seemed familiar to him, although he was not sure why, at the greenish haft, which was made of a material neither wood nor metal, and again at the smooth glow that reminded him of the flameless lanterns that the elves and the dwarves used to light their halls. Is it Galbatorix's handiwork, do you think? Aragon asked. Maybe he's decided he would rather kill Saphira and me instead of capturing us. Maybe he believes we've actually become a threat to him. Blodgarm smiled an unpleasant smile. I would not deceive myself with such fantasies, Shadeslayer. We are no more than a minor annoyance to Galbatorix. If ever he truly wanted you or any of us dead, he only needs to fly forth from Uruibane and engage us directly in battle, and we would fall before him like dry leaves before a winter storm. The strength of the dragons is with him, and none can withstand his might. Besides, Galbatorix is not so easily turned from his course. Mad he may be, but cunning also, and above all else, determined. If he desires your enslavement, then he shall pursue that goal to the point of obsession, and nothing save the instinct of self-preservation shall deter him. In any event, said Arya, this is not Galbatorix's handiwork, it is ours. Aragon frowned. Ours? This wasn't made by the Varden. Not by the Varden, but by an elf. But, he stopped, trying to find a rational explanation. But no elf would agree to work for Galbatorix. They would rather die than. Galbatorix had nothing to do with this, and even if he did, he would hardly give such a rare and powerful weapon to a man who could not better guard it. Of all the instruments of war scattered throughout Algesia, this is the one Galbatorix would least want us to have. Why? With a hint of a purr in his low, rich voice, Blodgarm said, because, Aragon Shadeslayer, this is a Dothdair. And its name is Nirnan, the orchid, said Arya. She pointed at the lines carved into the blade, lines that Aragon then realized were actually stylized glyphs from the elves' unique system of writing, curving, intertwined shapes that terminated in long, thorn-like points. A Dothdair. When both Arya and Blodgarm looked at him with incredulity, Aragon shrugged, embarrassed by his lack of education. It frustrated him that, while growing up, the elves had enjoyed decades upon decades of study with the finest scholars of their race, and yet his own uncle, Arrow, had not even taught him his letters, deeming it unimportant. I could only do so much reading in Elsmera. What is it? Was it forged during the fall of the Riders, to use against Galbatorix and the Forsworn? Blodgarm shook his head. Nirnan is far, far older than that. The Dothdairtia, said Arya, were born out of the fear and the hate that marked the final years of our war with the dragons. Our most skilled smiths and spellcasters crafted them out of materials we no longer understand, imbued them with enchantments whose wordings we no longer remember, and named them, all 12 of them, after the most beautiful of flowers, as ugly a mismatch as ever there was, for we made them with but one purpose in mind, we made them to kill dragons. Revulsion overtook Aragon as he gazed at the glowing lance. And did they? Those who were present say that the dragon's blood rained from the sky like a summer downpour. Saphira hissed, loud and sharp. Aragon glanced back at her for a moment and saw out of the corner of his eye that the Varden were still holding their position before the keep, waiting for him and Saphira to retake the lead in the offensive. All of the Dothdairtia were thought to have been destroyed or lost beyond recovery, said Blodgarm. Obviously, we were mistaken. Nirnan must have passed into the hands of the Walgrave family, and they must have kept it hidden here in Bellatona. I would guess that when we breached the city walls, Lord Bradburn's courage failed him and he ordered Nirnan brought from his armory in an attempt to stop you and Saphira. No doubt Galbatorix would be angry beyond reason if he knew that Bradburn had tried to kill you. Although he was aware of the need for haste, Aragon's curiosity would not let him leave just yet. Doth dared or not, you still haven't explained why Galbatorix wouldn't want us to have this. You motioned toward the lance. What makes Nirnan any more dangerous than that spear over there, or even Briss? He caught himself before he uttered the entire name, or my own sword. It was Arya who answered. It cannot be broken by any normal means, cannot be harmed by fire, and is almost completely impervious to magic, as you yourself saw. The Dothdarti were designed to be unaffected by whatever spells the dragons might work and to protect their wielder from the same, a daunting prospect, given the strength, complexity, and unexpected nature of dragon's magic. Galbatorix may have wrapped Shriekin and himself in more wards than anyone else in Algesia, but it is possible that Nirnan could pass through their defenses as if they don't even exist. Aragon understood, and elation filled him. We have too. A squeal interrupted him. The sound was stabbing, slicing, shivering, like metal scraping against stone. Aragon's teeth vibrated in sympathy and he covered his ears with his hands, grimacing as he twisted around, trying to locate the source of the noise. Saphira tossed her head, and even through the din, he heard her whine in distress. Aragon swept his gaze over the courtyard 2 separate times before he noticed a faint puff of dust rising up the wall of the keep from a foot-wide crack that had appeared beneath the blackened, partially destroyed window where Blodgarm had killed the magician. As the squeal increased in intensity, Aragon risked lifting one of his hands off his ears to point at the crack. Look, he shouted to Arya, who nodded in acknowledgement. He replaced his hand over his ear. Without warning or preamble, the sound stopped. Aragon waited for a moment, then slowly lowered his hands, for once wishing that his hearing were not quite so sensitive. Just as he did, the crack jerked open wider, spreading until it was several feet across, and raced down the wall of the keep. Like a bolt of lightning, the crack struck and shattered the keystone above the doors to the building, showering the floor below with pebbles. The whole castle groaned, and from the damaged window to the broken keystone, the front of the keep began to lean outward. Run, Aragon shouted at the Varden, though the men were already scattering to either side of the courtyard, desperate to get out from under the precarious wall. Aragon took a single step forward, every muscle in his body tense as he searched for a glimpse of Roran somewhere in the throng of warriors. At last Aragon spotted him, trapped behind the last group of men by the doorway, bellowing madly at them, his words lost in the commotion. Then the wall shifted and dropped several inches, leaning even farther away from the rest of the building, pelting Roran with rocks, knocking him off balance, and forcing him to stumble backward under the overhang of the doorway. As Roran straightened from a crouch, his eyes met Aragon's, and in his gaze Aragon saw a flash of fear and helplessness, quickly followed by resignation, as if Roran knew that, no matter how fast he ran, he could not possibly reach safety in time. A wry smile touched Roran's lips. And the wall fell. Hammerfall. No, shouted Aragon as the wall of the keep tumbled down with a thunderous crash, burying Roran and 5 other men beneath a mound of stone 20 feet high and flooding the courtyard with a dark cloud of dust. Aragon's shout was so loud, his voice broke, and slick, copper-tasting blood coated the back of his throat. He inhaled and doubled over, coughing. Beatna, he gasped, and waved his hand. With a sound like rustling silk, the thick gray dust parted, leaving the center of the courtyard clear. Concerned as he was for Roran, Aragon barely noticed the strength the spell took from him. No, 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 Aragon muttered. He can't be dead. He can't, he can't, he can't. As if repetition might make it true, Aragon continued to think the phrase. But with every repetition, it became less a statement of fact or hope and more a prayer to the world at large. Before him, Arya and the other warriors of the Varden stood coughing and rubbing their eyes with the palms of their hands. Many were hunched over, as if expecting a blow, others gaped at the front of the damaged keep. The rubble from the building spilled into the middle of the courtyard, obscuring the mosaic. 2.5 rooms on the second story of the keep, and one on the third, the room where the magician had expired so violently, stood exposed to the elements. The chambers and their furnishings seemed dirty and rather shabby in the full light of the sun. Within, a half-dozen soldiers armed with crossbows were scrambling back from the drop they now found themselves standing by. With much pushing and shoving, they hurried through the doors at the far ends of the rooms and vanished into the depths of the keep. Aragon tried to guess the weight of a block in the pile of rubble. It must have been many hundreds of pounds. If he, Saphira, and the elves all worked together, he was sure that they could shift the stones with magic, but the effort would leave them weak and vulnerable. Moreover, it would take an impractically long time. For a moment, Aragon thought of Glader. The golden dragon was more than strong enough to lift the whole pile at once, but haste was of the essence, and Glader's Eldenari would take too long to retrieve. In any case, Aragon knew that he might not even be able to convince Glader to talk with him, much less to help rescue Rorin and the other men. Then Aragon pictured Rorin as he had appeared just before the deluge of stones and dust had hidden him from view, standing underneath the eaves of the doorway to the keep, and with a start, he realized what to do. Saphira, help them, Aragon shouted as he cast aside his shield and bounded forward. Behind him, he heard Arya say something in the ancient language, a short phrase that might have been, hide this. Then she had caught up to him, running with her sword in hand, ready to fight. When he reached the base of the rubble, Aragon leapt as high as he could. He lit with a single foot upon the slanting face of a block and then jumped again, bounding from point to point like a mountain goat scaling the side of a gorge. He hated to risk disturbing the blocks, but climbing the pile was the fastest way to reach his destination. With one last lunge, Aragon cleared the edge of the second story, then raced across the room. He shoved the door in front of him with such force that he broke the latch and hinges and sent the door flying into the wall of the corridor beyond, splitting the heavy oak planks. Aragon sprinted down the corridor. His footsteps and his breathing sounded strangely muted to him, as if his ears were filled with water. He slowed as he drew near an open doorway. Through it, he saw a study with 5 armed men pointing at a map and arguing. None of them noticed Aragon. He kept running. He sped around a corner and collided with a soldier walking in the opposite direction. Aragon's vision flashed red and yellow as his forehead struck the rim of the man's shield. He clung to the soldier, and the two of them staggered back and forth across the corridor like a pair of drunk dancers. The soldier uttered an oath as he struggled to regain his balance. "What's wrong with you, you thrice blasted?" he said, and then he saw Aragon's face, and his eyes widened. "You." Aragon balled his right hand and punched the man in the belly, directly underneath his rib cage. The blow lifted the man off his feet and smashed him into the ceiling. "Me," Aragon agreed as the man dropped to the floor, lifeless. Aragon continued down the corridor. His already rapid pulse seemed to have doubled since he entered the keep. He felt as if his heart were about to burst out of his chest. "Where is it?" he thought, frantic as he glanced through yet another doorway and saw nothing but an empty room. At last, at the end of a dingy side passage, he caught sight of a winding staircase. He took the stairs 5 at a time, heedless of his own safety as he descended toward the first story, pausing only to push a startled archer out of his way. The stairs ended, and he emerged into a high-vaulted chamber reminiscent of the cathedral in Drosleona. He spun around, gathering quick impressions. Shields and arms and red pennants hung on the walls, narrow windows close under the ceiling, torches mounted in wrought iron brackets, empty fireplaces, long, dark trestle tables stacked along both sides of the hall, and a dais at the head of the room, where a robed and bearded man stood before a high-backed chair. Aragon was in the main hall of the castle. To his right, between him and the doors that led to the entrance of the keep, was a contingent of 50 or more soldiers. The gold thread in their tunics glittered as they stirred with surprise. "Kill him," the robed man ordered, sounding more frightened than lordly. "Whosoever kills him shall have a third of my treasure. So I promise." A terrible frustration welled up inside Aragon at being delayed once again. He tore his sword from its scabbard, lifted it over his head, and shouted, "Brisinger." With a rush of air, a cocoon of wraith-like blue flames sprang into existence around the blade, running up toward the tip. The heat from the fire warmed Aragon's hand, arm, and the side of his face. Then Aragon lowered his gaze to the soldiers. "Move," he growled. The soldiers hesitated a moment more, then turned and fled. Aragon charged forward, ignoring the panicked laggards within reach of his burning sword. One man tripped and fell before him. Aragon jumped completely over the soldier, not even touching the tassel on his helm. The wind from Aragon's passage tore at the flames on the blade, stretching them out behind the sword like the mane of a galloping horse. Punching his shoulders, Aragon bowled past the double doors that guarded the entrance to the main hall. He dashed through a long, wide chamber edged with rooms full of soldiers, as well as gears, pulleys, and other mechanisms used for raising and lowering the gates of the keep, and then ran full tilt into the portcullis that blocked the way to where Rorin had been standing when the keep wall collapsed. The iron grating bent as Aragon slammed into it, but not enough to break the metal. He staggered back a step. He again channeled energy stored within the diamonds of his belt, the belt of Beloth the Wise, and into Brisinger, emptying the gemstones of their precious stores. He stoked the sword's fire to an almost unbearable intensity. A wordless shout escaped him as he drew back his arm and struck at the portcullis. Orange and yellow sparks sprayed him, hitting his gloves and tunic and stinging his exposed flesh. A drop of molten iron fell sizzling onto the tip of his boot. With a twitch of his ankle, he shook it off. 3 cuts he made, and a man-sized section of the portcullis fell inward. The severed ends of the grating glowed white-hot, lighting the area with their soft radiance. Aragon allowed the flames rising from Brisinger to die out as he proceeded through the opening he had created. First to the left, then to the right, and then to the left again he ran as the passage alternated directions, the convoluted path designed to slow the advance of troops if they managed to gain access to the keep. When he rounded the last corner, Aragon saw his destination, the debris-choked vestibule. Even with his elf-like vision, he could make out only the largest shapes in the darkness, for the falling stones had extinguished the torches on the walls. He heard an odd huffing and scuffling, as if some sort of clumsy beast were rooting through the rubble. "Naina," said Aragon. A directionless blue light illuminated the space. And there before him, covered in dirt, blood, ash, and sweat, with his teeth bared in a fearsome snarl, appeared Roran, grappling with a soldier over the corpses of 2 others. The soldier winced at the sudden brightness, and Roran took advantage of the man's distraction to twist and push him to his knees, whereupon he grabbed the soldier's dagger from his belt and drove it up under the corner of his jaw. The soldier kicked twice and then was still. Panting for breath, Roran rose from the body, blood dripping from his fingers. He looked over at Aragon with a curiously glazed expression. "About time you," he said, and then his eyes rolled back into his head as he fainted. Shadows on the horizon. In order to catch Roran before he struck the floor, Aragon had to drop Brisinger, which he was reluctant to do. Nevertheless, he opened his hand, and the sword clattered against the stones even as Roran's weight settled into his arms. "Is he badly hurt?" Arya asked. Aragon flinched, surprised to find her and Blodgarm standing next to him. "I don't think so." He patted Roran's cheeks several times, smearing the dust on his skin. In the flat, ice-blue glare of Aragon's spell, Roran appeared gaunt, his eyes surrounded by bruised shadows, and his lips a purplish color, as if stained with the juice from berries. "Come on, wake up." After a few seconds, Roran's eyelids twitched, then he opened them and looked at Aragon, obviously confused. Relief washed over Aragon, so strong he could taste it. "You blacked out for a moment," he explained. "Ah. He's alive," Aragon said to Saphira, risking a brief moment of contact. Her pleasure was obvious. "Good. I will stay here and help the elves move the stones away from the building. If you need me, shout, and I'll find a way to reach you." Roran's mail tinkled as Aragon helped him onto his feet. "What of the others?" Aragon asked, and gestured toward the mound of rubble. Roran shook his head. "Are you sure? No one could have survived under there. I only escaped because I was partially sheltered by the eaves." "And you're all right?" Aragon asked. "What?" Roran frowned, seeming distracted, as if the thought had not even occurred to him. "I'm fine. Wrist might be broken. It's not bad." Aragon cast a meaningful glance at Blodgarm. The elf's features tightened with a faint display of displeasure, but he went over to Roran and, in a smooth voice, said, "If I may." He extended a hand toward Roran's injured arm. While Blodgarm labored over Roran, Aragon picked up Brisinger, then stood guard with Arya at the entrance in case any soldiers were so foolhardy as to launch an attack. "There, all done," Blodgarm said. He moved away from Roran, who rolled his wrist in a circle, testing the joint. Satisfied, Roran thanked Blodgarm, then lowered his hand and cast about the rubble-strewn floor until he found his hammer. He readjusted the position of his armor and looked out the entrance. "I've about had my fill of this Lord Bradburn," he said in a deceptively calm tone. "He has held his seat over long, I think, and ought to be relieved of his responsibilities. Wouldn't you agree, Arya?" "I would," she said. "Well then, let's find the soft-bellied old fool. I would give him a few gentle taps from my hammer in memory of everyone we have lost today." "He was in the main hall a few minutes ago," Aragon said, "but I doubt he stayed to await our return." Roran nodded. "Then we'll have to hunt him down." And with that, he strode forward. Aragon extinguished his illuminating spell and hurried after his cousin, holding Brisinger at the ready. Arya and Blodgarm stayed as close beside him as the convoluted passageway would allow. The chamber that the passageway led to was abandoned, as was the main hall of the castle, where the only evidence of the dozens of soldiers and officials who had populated it was a helmet that lay on the floor, rocking back and forth in ever-decreasing arcs. Aragon and Roran ran past the marble dais, Aragon restricting his speed so as not to leave Roran behind. They kicked down a door just to the left of the platform and rushed up the stairs beyond. At each story, they paused so that Blodgarm could search with his mind for any trace of Lord Bradburn and his retinue, but he found none. As they reached the third level, Aragon heard a stampede of footsteps and saw a thicket of jabbing spears fill the curved archway in front of Roran. The spears cut Roran on the cheek and on his right thigh, coating his knee with blood. He bellowed like a wounded bear and rammed into the spears with his shield, trying to push his way up the last few steps and out of the stairwell. Men shouted frantically. Behind Roran, Aragon switched Brisinger to his left hand, then reached around his cousin, grabbed one of the spears by the haft, and yanked it out of the grip of whoever was holding it. He flipped the spear around and threw it into the center of the men packed in the archway. Someone screamed, and a gap appeared in the wall of bodies. Aragon repeated the process, and his throws soon reduced the number of soldiers enough that, step by step, Roran was able to force the mass of men back. As soon as Roran won clear of the stairs, the 12 remaining soldiers scattered across a wide landing fringed with balustrades, each man seeking room to swing his weapon without obstruction. Roran bellowed again and leapt after the nearest soldier. He parried the man's sword, then stepped past his guard and struck the man on his helm, which rang like an iron pot. Aragon sprinted across the landing and tackled a pair of soldiers who were standing close together. He knocked them to the ground, then dispatched each of them with a single thrust of Brisinger. An axe hurtled toward him, whirling end over end. He ducked and pushed a man over a balustrade before engaging two others who were trying to disembowel him with built pikes. Then Arya and Blodgarm were moving among the men, silent and deadly, the elves' inherent grace making the violence appear more like an artfully staged performance than the sordid struggle most fights were. In a rush of clanging metal, broken bones, and severed limbs, the four of them killed the rest of the soldiers. As always, the combat exhilarated Aragon. It felt to him like being shocked with a bucket of cold water, and it left him with a sense of clarity unequaled by any other activity. Roran bent over and rested his hands on his knees, gasping for air as if he had just finished a race. "Shall I?" asked Aragon, gesturing at the cuts on Roran's face and thigh. Roran tested his weight on the wounded leg a few times. "I can wait, let's find Bradburn first." Aragon took the lead as they filed back into the stairwell and resumed their climb. At last, after another 5 minutes of searching, they found Lord Bradburn barricaded within the highest room of the keep's westernmost tower. With a series of spells, Aragon, Arya, and Blodgarm disassembled the doors and the tower of furniture piled behind them. As they and Roran entered the chambers, the high-ranking retainers and castle guards who had gathered in front of Lord Bradburn blanched, and many began to shake. To Aragon's relief, he only had to kill 3 of the guards before the rest of the group placed their weapons and shields on the floor in surrender. Then Arya marched over to Lord Bradburn, who had remained silent throughout, and said, "Now, will you order your forces to stand down? Only a few remain, but you can still save their lives." "I would not even if I could," said Bradburn in a voice of such hate and sneering derision, Aragon almost struck him. "You'll have no concessions from me, elf. I'll not give up my men to filthy, unnatural creatures such as you. Death would be preferable, and do not think you can beguile me with honeyed words. I know of your alliance with the Urgles, and I would sooner trust a snake than a person who breaks bread with those monsters." Arya nodded and placed her hand over Bradburn's face. She closed her eyes, and for a time, both she and Bradburn were motionless. Aragon reached out with his mind, and he felt the battle of wills that was raging between them as Arya worked her way past Bradburn's defenses and into his consciousness. It took a minute, but at last she gained control of the man's mind, whereupon she set about calling up and examining his memories until she discovered the nature of his wards. Then she spoke in the ancient language and cast a complex spell designed to circumvent those wards and to put Bradburn to sleep. When she finished, Bradburn's eyes closed and, with a sigh, he collapsed into her arms. "She killed him," shouted one of the guards, and cries of fear and outrage spread among the men. As Aragon attempted to convince them otherwise, he heard one of the Varden's trumpets being winded far off in the distance. Soon another trumpet sounded, this one much closer, then another, and then he caught snatches of what he would have sworn were faint, scattered cheers rising from the courtyard below. Puzzled, he exchanged glances with Arya, then they turned in a circle, looking out each of the windows set within the walls of the chamber. To the west and south lay Bellatona. It was a large, prosperous city, one of the largest in the empire. Close to the castle, the buildings were imposing structures made of stone, with pitched roofs and oriel windows, while farther away they were constructed of wood and plaster. Several of the half-timbered buildings had caught fire during the fighting. The smoke filled the air with a layer of brown haze that stung eyes and throats. To the southwest, a mile beyond the city, was the Varden's camp. Long rows of gray woolen tents ringed by stake-lined trenches, a few brightly colored pavilions sporting flags and pennants, and stretched out on the bare ground, hundreds of wounded men. The healers' tents were already filled to capacity. To the north, past the docks and warehouses, was Leona Lake, a vast expanse of water dotted with the occasional whitecap. Above, the wall of black clouds that was advancing from the west loomed high over the city, threatening to envelop it within the folds of rain that fell skirt-like from its underside. Blue light flickered here and there in the depths of the storm, and thunder rumbled like an angry beast. But nowhere did Aragon see an explanation for the commotion that had attracted his attention. He and Arya hurried over to the window directly above the courtyard. Saphira and the men and elves working with her had just finished clearing away the stones in front of the keep. Aragon whistled, and when Saphira looked up, he waved. Her long jaws parted in a toothy grin, and she blew a streamer of smoke toward him. "Oh, what news?" Aragon shouted. One of the Varden standing on the castle walls raised an arm and pointed eastward. "Shadowslayer, look, the werecats are coming, the werecats are coming." A cold tingle crawled down Aragon's spine. He followed the line of the man's arm eastward, and this time he saw a host of small, shadowy figures emerging from a fold in the land several miles away, on the other side of the giant river. Some of the figures went on 4 legs and some on 2, but they were too far away for him to be sure if they were werecats. "Could it be?" asked Arya, sounding amazed. "I don't know. Whatever they are, we'll find out soon enough." King Cat. Aragon stood on the dais in the main hall of the keep, directly to the right of Lord Bradburn's throne, his left hand on the pommel of Brisinger, which was sheathed. On the other side of the throne stood Jormungandr, senior commander of the Varden, holding his helmet in the crook of his arm. The hair at his temples was streaked with gray, the rest was brown, and all of it was pulled back into a long braid. His lean face bore the studiously blank expression of a person who had extensive experience waiting on others. Aragon noticed a thin line of red running along the underside of Jormundrar's right bracer, but Jormungandr showed no sign of pain. Between them sat their leader, Nasuda, resplendent in a dress of green and yellow, which she had donned just moments before, exchanging the raiment of war for garb more suited to the practice of statecraft. She too had been marked during the fighting, as was evidenced by the linen bandage wrapped around her left hand. In a low voice that only Aragon and Jormungandr could hear, Nasuda said, "If we can but gain their support." "What will they want in return, though?" asked Jormungandr. "Our coffers are near empty, and our future uncertain." Her lips barely moving, she said, "Perhaps they wish nothing more of us than a chance to strike back at Galbatorix." She paused. "But if not, we shall have to find means other than gold to persuade them to join our ranks." "You could offer them barrels of cream," said Aragon, which elicited a chortle from Jormungandr and a soft laugh from Nasuda. Their murmured conversation came to an end as 3 trumpets sounded outside the main hall. Then a flaxen-haired page dressed in a tunic stitched with the Varden standard, a white dragon holding a rose above a sword pointing downward on a purple field, marched through the open doorway at the far end of the hall, struck the floor with his ceremonial staff, and, in a thin, warbling voice, announced, "His Most Exalted Royal Highness, Grimar Halfpaw, King of the Werecats, Lord of the Lonely Places, Ruler of the Night Reaches, and He Who Walks Alone." A strange title, that, He Who Walks Alone, Aragon observed to Saphira. "But well deserved, I would guess," she replied, and he could sense her amusement, even though he could not see her where she lay coiled in the castle keep. The page stepped aside, and through the doorway strode Grimar Halfpaw in the shape of a human, trailed by 4 other werecats, who padded close behind him on large, shaggy paws. The 4 resembled Solembum, the one other werecat Aragon had seen in the guise of an animal, heavy-shouldered and long-limbed, with short, dark ruffs upon their necks and withers, tasseled ears, and black-tipped tails, which they waved gracefully from side to side. Grimar Halfpaw, however, looked unlike any person or creature Aragon had ever seen. At roughly 4 feet tall, he was the same height as a dwarf, but no one could have mistaken him for a dwarf, or even for a human. He had a small pointed chin, wide cheekbones, and, underneath upswept brows, slanted green eyes fringed with wing-like eyelashes. His ragged black hair hung low over his forehead, while on the sides and back it fell to his shoulders, where it lay smooth and lustrous, much like the manes of his companions. His age was impossible for Aragon to guess. The only clothes Grimar wore were a rough leather vest and a rabbit-skin loincloth. The skulls of a dozen or so animals, birds, mice, and other small game, were tied to the front of the vest, and they rattled against one another as he moved. A sheathed dagger protruded at an angle from under the belt of his loincloth. Numerous scars, thin and white, marked his nut-brown skin, like scratches on a well-used table. And, as his name indicated, he was missing 2 fingers on his left hand. They looked to have been bitten off. Despite the delicacy of his features, there was no doubt that Grimar was male, given the hard, sinewy muscles of his arms and chest, the narrowness of his hips, and the coiled power of his stride as he sauntered down the length of the hall toward Nasuda. None of the werecats seemed to notice the people lined up on either side of their path watching them until Grimar came level with the herbalist Angela, who stood next to Roran, knitting a striped tube sock with 6 needles. Grimar's eyes narrowed as he beheld the herbalist, and his hair rippled and spiked, as did that of his 4 guards. His lips drew back to reveal a pair of curved white fangs, and to Aragon's astonishment, he uttered a short, loud hiss. Angela looked up from the sock, her expression languid and insolent. "Cheap, cheap," she said. For a moment, Aragon thought the werecat was going to attack her. A dark flush mottled Grimar's neck and face, his nostrils flared, and he snarled silently at her. The other werecats settled into low crouches, ready to pounce, their ears pressed flat against their heads. Throughout the hall, Aragon heard the slither of blades being partially drawn from their scabbards. Grimar hissed once more, then turned away from the herbalist and continued walking. As the last werecat in line passed Angela, he lifted a paw and took a surreptitious swipe at the strand of yarn that drooped from Angela's needles, just like a playful house cat might. Saphira's bewilderment was equal to Aragon's own. "Cheap, cheap?" she asked. He shrugged, forgetting that she could not see him. Who knows why Angela does or says anything? At last Grimar arrived before Nasuda. He inclined his head ever so slightly, displaying with his bearing the supreme confidence, even arrogance, that was the sole province of cats, dragons, and certain highborn women. "Lady Nasuda," he said. His voice was surprisingly deep, more akin to the low, coughing roar of a wildcat than the high-pitched tones of the boy he resembled. Nasuda inclined her head in turn. "King Halfpaw, you are most welcome to the Varden, you and all your race. I must apologize for the absence of our ally, King Warren of Serda. He could not be here to greet you, as he wished, for he and his horsemen are even now busy defending our westward flank from a contingent of Galbatorix's troops." "Of course, Lady Nasuda," said Grimar. His sharp teeth flashed as he spoke.